Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is Go Again, a fabulous video cast covering the trading card game Flesh and Blood. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando. So the Calling Las Vegas is in the books, and I wanted to extend a huge congratulations to everyone who did well, not just with performance, whether it be in the main event or side events, but also to those, and a special congratulations to people who went there and just had a good time. Even though I wasn't able to go, I had a great time kind of living vicariously through people's photos and tracking what was going on, and just seeing how things developed over the weekend. I had a great time, and I'm sure you guys had 100, 1,000 times X more, so congratulations. So one of the cool things that came out of this weekend was a huge data set, right? And while all the exact numbers are still coming in terms of, the main field, we have a really good picture of how things shaped up in top 64, top 8, and so on. So about 6 or so weeks ago, we had an interesting conversation called Good Not Great, which was basically about using conversion rate as a meta strength metric indicator for various heroes, right? Where does a hero fall within the meta? How are they performing, and so on? And as part of that conversation, I basically made the argument that conversion rate does not tell the whole story because it starts to fall apart under its own weight at some point. So I thought what would be cool would be to go back and visit that discussion using the statistics from this weekend and looking at it in terms of overall meta strength. Now, we do know that Prism won the main event, but Chane called the weekend, right? So with that stuff in mind, let's go look at the data and how it fit in with my argument and see if I need to change it. Hey folks, thanks for joining me again here on Go Again, a fabulous cast here on Dice Commando. Great time this weekend, and I thought it would be fun to, like I said, go back and kind of look at what we talked about before and how it holds. Now, kind of the background on this, for those that either don't want to go back and watch the video or just want to put in context, was what was happening as Chane was more or less plowing through a large number of Road to Nationals events. There were a lot of, there were people, of course, like, Chane's OP, he's broken. And that's not what this conversation is about, right? It's not about whether Chane is OP, whether he's broken, or whether he's not. It was about, the people who were saying he was, the defenders of him were saying, well, look at the conversion rates, right? 50% of the field is Chane, but, getting top 8 is only like 15%, therefore he must not be dominating. And that was the argument of a conversion rate, right? A conversion rate basically being, if the field was 50%, say there were 50 players in the field, but only 2 Chane players made in the top 8, thus 48 would have failed, and using that data basically to make the argument that because Chane is disproportionately making it into top cuts, that he's not ruling the meta, right? So there's that interesting balance between looking at, the number of people playing it versus the conversion rate, versus total numbers, right? Like if you were to show up with 1 Bravo and 1 Bravo made it in, no one's going to argue that Bravo wins 100% of the time, right? So that was basically the kind of the long story short of that, and I'll put up a little link to the video. You can go back and look at that. So my argument, of course, was that conversion rate is a good metric to start with, but it starts to fall apart under its own weight when you get a field that is largely dominated, because once you get to the point where a hero starts eating themselves in Swiss, right? When chains are beating chains, it becomes very, very difficult for that hero or that deck archetype or whatever it may be. It becomes very, very difficult for them to have an overrepresentation or even an equal representation in Top Cut, because they're literally destroying themselves once the field gets too big. So that was the argument. Now, I had a great conversation, as I usually do. This was with Dane from Outcast Haven. And what he basically proposed out of that was he was fundamentally agreeing with me, and I mean, of course, we're happy. I'm happy when someone agrees with me, right? But fundamentally, what he proposed was that we instead look at the ratios. And not the conversion rates, but rather the play ratios, the changes in ratios between the various cuts, right? So if he were to say, by his argument then, or his proposal was, and it kind of developed as the conversation went, but basically what we came up with through the conversation was that, let's say 50% of the field is Chane, you would then say he's equally represented if roughly 50% of him got into top cut, right? And I think that's that was kind of the evolution of this, is I think that's a far more reasonable way to look at it, right? Because then you're not just looking at the hero itself, you're looking at the players and stuff, like you're taking a lot more into account. So that was fundamentally kind of the proposal that we came up with out of this. So what I'm going to put up now, and I'm actually working off two computers, right? So you'll excuse me for not looking directly at you, because this is the shooting computer and this one's got all the tech stuff on it, right? So what I have up right now, I'll even move the mic here. What I have up right now is my summary table. Now, there's a couple disclaimers here of that we don't, at least of the time the shooting this, we don't have the full field breakdown. So for the heroes that were able to make it into top cut, because we knew from one data set, I did find data out there that correlated the conversion rate into top 64. But obviously for the heroes that didn't make it in top 64, that's a 0, you're not able to back calculate out that, right? Just because you can't divide by 0, right? So we cannot determine Azalea, Levia, Rhinar, or Viscerai. But for the ones that did make it into top 64, at least with the chart that I found, which granted you have to do some rounding as well, because it's not like 6.1%, it was just 6%, right? But largely that's what the field breakdown was that we had roughly, and I don't have percentages on the main field because, again, we're not including the other heroes, right? So, but we had roughly an 18% conversion rate for Chane into top 64, that is. Roughly 10% for Bravo, 8 for Prism, 10 for Dorinthea, 6 for Katsu, 4 for Boltyn, 3% for Dash, which is actually pretty low, and then 7% for Kano, which, again, that's kind of where this, like, do we think there were more Dash? Like, I would guess that there were actually more Dash players than, and the numbers support that, right? So, the point is there were more Dash players, but only one Dash player made it in, right? Or sorry, 2 made it in, 1 made it in top cut. There were only 2 that made it in, but there were more people that showed up with Dash, right? Because, right, so then you make the arguments like, well, is Dash a better, right? More people wanted to show up with Dash, so is Dash better than Wizard, is what I'm saying, right? So by one single Wizard, right, so a small pool by one single Wizard making it in, it starts to throw off that ratio, which is kind of exactly the point, right? So by that argument of what we're saying at looking at ratios, if you were to look at, that being 7% of the field, you should see roughly 7% of the top cut still be Kano, depending on how that goes. Okay, so once we get into the top 64, Chane made up roughly it was 45%, so just under half the field was Chane, 14% Bravo, 11% Prism, 9% Thea and Katsu, 6% Boltyn, 3% Dash, and 2% of the field, that is, was Kano. Okay, so now we go into the top 8 cut, right? Or not the top 8 cut, and we look at the conversion rate now from top 64 to top 8. Okay, so what we saw was that 45% of the field, okay, was in top 64, 45% of the field was Chane. But in the top 8 cut, 63% of the field was Chane, 5 of them. We had 2 Prisms, so 29%, and we had 1 Dash. You're a hero, by the way. Alberto, if you're watching this, you're the man. So 1 Dash at 13% of the field, but that 13% of the field is a 50% conversion rate. So if we were working on pure conversion rate, right? Because remember, you don't work off conversion rate for the winner, because obviously that's always going to be weighted, right? But what we're looking at overall with this is like looking at in the larger field, right? Looking at the cuts, which heroes are reliably in mass able to make it better. And what we're seeing are, right, the Dash is a good example of where this starts to fall apart is Dash obviously improves significantly from 3% to 13%, right? So what that's indicating at a data level is that Dash should be overweighted, right? Meaning that Dash should be good. Dash should be well positioned. And while I don't think anybody out there is going to say Dash is not good, at least now, we'll wait for the next meta. But right now, I don't think anybody would say Dash is not good. But I also don't think anybody would say, certainly, let's be very, very clear here and make sure I said those words clearly. Dash is very good, very well positioned in the meta. But what I'm saying is I don't think anybody's not saying that. But I don't think anybody's saying that Dash is OP in the current meta, right? And looking at this data set, those numbers, part of that would seem to indicate that, right? If we were using purely the conversion rates. And that's kind of where I'm going off of this, right? The conversion rate of 50% for Dash from 64 to 8 would indicate that she's fantastically well positioned in the meta. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. And I don't think very many people would disagree with me on that. On the flip side, if you look at Chane, 45% of the field to 6. So he started off at, well, again, we don't know what percentage of the field, but he had an 18% conversion rate to form 45% of the top 64. 45% of the top 64 to then get 5 of 8 positions in the top cut. So I think the data's there to say that Chane is very, very, very favored in the current meta, right? And a lot of people are going to be like, well, obviously, right? But part of what generated this discussion in the Wayback Machine was that individuals were using this very data to say that, look, Chane's conversion rate from main to from Swiss to top cut is not high. It's not as high as the other heroes, and therefore Chane is not overweighted in the meta, right? And I think that slicing the data this way, looking at the percentage of it in the field and how he went from an 18% conversion rate again. So we can't know his position. We can't know, at least as of right now, we don't know his exact breakdown in the field, but he's very clearly the big, right? 161 people in Swiss, right? Give or take a few based on rounding, but it's roughly 160 people in Swiss. That's larger than anybody else by about 1.5%, right? By about 50%, not 1.5%, 50%, 1.5. So you look at Chane, and then he's larger in Swiss. He has the largest representation in top cut. And then that conversion rate, even like the conversion rate, and it's not the conversion rate, it's the ratio. The ratio holds and actually improves into the top 8, right? So even if you throw out the main Swiss data saying it's a bunch of dirty scrubs, right? Even if you look at the 64, which are supposedly your good players, right? Put everything on an even playing field. If you look at that, it goes from 45% of the field to 63% of the field, right? So the data here very, very clearly supports, in my opinion, that Chane is the powerhouse, is the favored in the meta. Now, again, somebody's going to say, well, he didn't win the event. Fair enough, right? But again, what we're looking at here is, and he didn't win every road to nationals either, right? Which again is part of the, it's one of those things where you can use the data to kind of cut it to justify whatever you want, and then when the data doesn't fit your story, you just throw it out and say, well, he didn't win. I get it. You do you. But in my opinion, the data here very clearly shows that Chane is a statistical powerhouse in the meta. Now, I don't know that we need to do anything about it. And again, looking at the next meta, I don't know that he's as well positioned. I don't know that we have to worry about it. And especially now that now that Prism won, it's probably going to shift a lot of things. Like there's probably a lot of people are going to start looking at Prism because they want to look at the winning deck list and stuff, right? So we'll see how that moves. But again, the point of tonight was to kind of go back and reevaluate my argument, which was that you can't purely use conversion rates. And I think the data tonight very, very clearly supports that, right? If you look at Chane's conversion rate of 17% into top 8, 17% into top 8, you'd say, well, he was 18% into top 64, he was 17% into top 8. Yeah, he looks about average, right? He held his ground. But, right, so you could say, well, he about held his ground, so, I mean, he's not really overpowered. But then if you look at the pure breakdown, which, again, I think, and again, that's what Dane was speaking to, if you look at the pure breakdown, he did improve, right? So overall, I think that's the much, much better way to look at this, is looking at their field position breakdown and not the conversion ratios. Because, again, right, you had, in the top 64, you had 29 players. Best case scenario, 8 of them could have made top 8. And if, let me do that math real quick, because I can't do it in my head because I'm shooting. 8 divided by 29 is 27%, right? So best case scenario, Chane's conversion rate would have been 27%, which I think a lot of people would say is not very good, right? So did I do that right? Yeah, that's about right. So yeah. So anyway, I think keep hammering into the ground here, but I think I thought this video is way longer than I want it to be too. I just kind of wanted to throw the data and support the point. But I think the data is solidly there to support that we can't use conversion rate. We cannot. It's a great place to start to give you a general idea, but it's way better to use the field ratio breakdown, right? Because if you're already knowing, right, to use conversion rate, you have to already know the same numbers that you need to know the field breakdown. And actually, it's easier to know the field breakdown. I mean, by like one division, which we can all do. I get it. But anyway, I don't know. I think that's basically it. I do hope that eventually we'll get the full field breakdown, because it was like 700 some people in the main event I heard. But again, without those 4 numbers, I can't total up the main field breakdown. But I mean, just looking at it, you have to assume. I mean, okay. Well, we know roughly. So we know that roughly. So because we know the 700-ish, let's call it, I don't know, just 750. That'll help the people trying to argue against me. Making it 750 will actually help your argument, right? Because it'll lower my number because it's a larger denominator, and that is 21%. Okay, so Chane was roughly between 20 and 25% of the main field, right, give or take, somewhere in that range. And he ended up with so he was 21% of the field in Swiss. He ended up with 45% of the field in Top Cut, and he ended up with 63% of the field in Top 8, right? So I think it's, and I think it's very hard to argue that Chane is not statistically favored in the meta, right? I think that's pretty solid. And if you look at Prism, she was 11%, so she was 8% conversion rate, but she was 11% of 64, and then she was 25% of the top 8 for a 29% conversion rate, right? So yeah, so she was, I mean, those numbers are actually pretty consistent, actually, but I mean, she definitely improved. So again, we kind of live in the age, you guys see the media, right? We kind of live in the age where people use data to support whatever they want. But looking at this from a purely analytics point of view, I think the data is very, very there, very clearly there to support that Chane is very strong in the current meta. Because 161 people, there's good players who did that, and there's also bad players who did that, right? So it averages out both ways. And when you have 50% of your top cut, 50% of your cut, and then 63% of your top cut as him, I think that speaks volume. So anyway, like I said, this ended up being way longer than I wanted it to be, so my apologies there. But hopefully it was interesting. Again, I firmly believe that we need to stop using conversion rate as our argument we need to stop using conversion rate as a convenient argument to show that our guy who is being played by 50% of the field is not strong, right? Or is not, I shouldn't say, because he's not. I don't think he's OP. I think he can very clearly be beat. I'm not arguing anything, and LSS literally has a system in place to check somebody who does, right? So I'm not concerned about it. It'll work itself out in the wash one way or the other. But to sit back and say that, well, look at the conversion rates, he's not favored, you're just flat out wrong. And I'm sorry. So anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for hanging out with me, folks, and go Commando.